Illumination Publishers presents Mighty Man of God, A Return to the Glory of Manhood by author Sam Laing. Chapter 3, Courage. We begin with a scripture. Be on your guard. Stand firm in the faith. Be men of courage. Be strong. 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 13. Is there any virtue more associated with manhood than courage? Courage is universally admired, praised, and sought after. No man who is truly a man does not admire those whom he regards as men of courage. There are many kinds of courage. We will look at 3. We will observe them in the life of King David, the leader of the mighty men. The first courage we will look at is titled The Courageous Deeds. David, as a teenager, was sent by his father to take food to his older brothers who were fighting for Israel in the army of King Saul. We know the rest of the story. How this young man faced and defeated the giant Goliath, who had reduced an army of brave men to whimpering cowards. David's courage was beyond compare. His deed that day won him a place in our hearts and in the history of God's people forever. David would probably have looked at us with puzzlement had we rushed up to him that day and breathlessly declared our admiration for his courage. But this man was insulting God. He would have answered, "What else was there to do?" That is what courage is all about, forgetting ourselves and becoming consumed with the glory of God. Then courage flows in our veins as a matter of course. We do not think about it. We do not think, "I must be courageous now." We only think, "The name of God, the reputation of his people, the salvation of a soul is at stake. I must act and act quickly." The issue of strength for the task is not of concern when we think this way, because we know that God will supply whatever we need, because it is his battle to fight and win. We are courageous because we know that God is with us, that God is for us. We are only servants, doing what any servant could and should do in the situation. Thus is born our courage, a courage of true manhood, a courage that inspires those who have been preoccupied with themselves and who have lost sight of God. Do you long for courage? See the world and the battles with the eyes of God, and courage will flow into you as from a mighty river. The second courage we will look at is titled The Courage to Endure. But there is a courage of another sort, and it in some ways is more difficult, more taxing, more trying than the courage we have just discussed. It is difficult because the lines of battle are not so clear, and because it is not finished with an afternoon's work. When David returned to the camp of Saul after his glorious victory over Goliath, he returned with a hero's welcome and to the admiration of all the people. "Saul has slain his thousands," sang the women, "and David his tens of thousands." 1 Samuel 18, verse 7. With that, David was to earn the enmity and brooding jealousy of Saul for the rest of Saul's life. From that day on, Saul considered David his enemy and sought to destroy him. David never knew why this was so, for Saul never spoke of it openly. But acting on his jealousy he did, and he drove David from his presence into the desert as an outlaw and refugee. God wanted David to remain within the borders of Israel, right under the nose of Saul. This story is recorded in 1 Samuel, chapters 22 through 26. David would have preferred to flee to another country, but God did not allow it. Day after day, month after month, year after year, David and his small band hid from Saul, eking out a hard existence in the barren wastelands of Judea. It was during this time that David wrote many of his greatest psalms, songs in which he poured out his heart to God, crying out for deliverance, companionship, and comfort. Circumstances like these demand from you courage of a higher order. This is the courage of staying on a righteous course when it seems there is no end to your difficulties, when there is no immediate reward, but only long days of loneliness and hardship. It means keeping up your spirits when there is no end in sight. It is the courage of continuing to trust in God when those who should be encouraging and inspiring you have descended into sin and whose once exemplary lives have fallen into the dust of pride, worldliness, and jealousy. It is the bravery required when your name is dragged down, when you are gossiped about, and when your motives are questioned. It is the nerve necessary when you are not sure what you should do, when there are difficulties in your way that do not easily present themselves as right and wrong. It is the courage demanded by the kinds of difficulties you face as you get older, when you see that sometimes, even in God's kingdom, the best people can let you down. This is a courage that must sustain you when you are tested as you have never been tested before. For academic clarity, it should be noted that in 1 Samuel chapter 27, David, relying on his own reasoning, left the borders established by God. However, he would later return as king, as recorded in 2 Samuel chapter 2. The third courage we will address is the courage to come back. The third type of courage is that of a man who has failed terribly, and who must face his failures and try to find his way back to God, to his true manhood. Once again, the story is familiar. David has committed adultery with Bathsheba and has lied and murdered to cover it up. He must now face the greatest test of his life. Does he have the courage to face God, his family, the nation, and himself with what he has done? Will he still be a man after the heart of God, or will he throw it all away now that he has committed such a grievous sin? We see his response as he recorded it in Psalm 51. He humbled himself, made no excuses, begged God for forgiveness and for a new heart, and strove to rebuild his life. None of us is perfect. We will all sin. Even if we do not sin as tragically as David did, we will sin and then must face the consequences of what we have done. Will we have the courage to cast ourselves on the mercy of God, or will we simply run away, or even take our own lives, as did Judas? But there are other kinds of courage as well. Different forms of bravery that shape a man's character and define his journey. Consider the following types of courage. Physical courage. This is the courage we demonstrate when we face danger or death. This is the courage of the soldier, the fireman, the policeman, or of any man who is faced with a situation that threatens his physical life. It is what the early Christians faced when they were thrown into the arena. To gain this kind of courage, we simply need to remember that if we are saved and going to heaven, we have nothing to fear, even if it means losing our life. Emotional courage. This is the courage required when everything around us seems to be going against us. It is the courage called for when we are under pressure at work, when we have had financial setbacks, or when we are going through spiritual and emotional upheaval. Jesus said in the 16th chapter of John, verse 33, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world." Too many of us men are not manly in the way we face adversity. We give in to depression, discouragement, and despair. It shows on our faces and in our posture. We are unable to encourage our wives, children, and friends. We become a burden rather than a burden bearer. While it is true that we must learn to express our hurts and fears, we must be careful not to let them dominate us. We must face our fears, but do so with a joyful, manly, and confident spirit. Social courage. This is the courage to do what is right, even when the crowd and popular opinion are against us. It is the courage demonstrated by Jesus when he returned to speak at the synagogue in his hometown of Nazareth, only to be received with anger and hostility. This is the courage required of us when we endure persecution for our faith from our families, friends, and fellow employees. It is the courage to stand alone with deep conviction and clear vision when all others around us are saying we should compromise. Social courage is required when we must work through difficult issues in relationships. Many of us have conflicts in our marriages and in other important relationships that we will not solve because we are cowards. We are unwilling to speak the truth in love, as it says in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 15, and so we remain unreconciled and distanced from those to whom we should be closest. I would urge you, have the courage to have the uncomfortable talks that will free you from the prison of detached, distant, and disconnected relationships. Personal courage. This is the kind of courage required when we challenge ourselves to go where we have never gone before and do what we have never done. This is the bravery demanded of us when we must make a change in our character or in our personality. This is the boldness that will cause us to take a risk rather than to remain comfortable. Many of us are stagnant, dead, and bored because we are unwilling to push ourselves beyond our fears. I would urge you to face your fears specifically and take steps to conquer each one. Motivational courage. This kind of courage is seen when God spoke to Joshua saying, "Be strong and very courageous. Do not be terrified, do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. That's in the first chapter of Joshua, verse 9. God meant business. There is a time when a man must simply look his fear in the face and say, I may be afraid, but I will not let my fear control me. There is a time when, for the sake of God, our families, our manhood, and righteousness, we must lay aside our fears, get up on our feet, and march forward to do what is necessary, no matter how we may feel. As we close this chapter, understand that true courage is not the absence of fear, but the resolve to stand firm despite it. Dare to trust God in every trial, to fight for righteousness even when the odds seem against you, and to rise again when you fall. Let your heart be steadfast, your faith unshakable, and your spirit unyielding. Step forward with the courage of a mighty man of God, knowing that with him, victory is always within reach. Whatever battles you face them with God. Whether it is the challenge of an intimidating and boasting wrong that must be righted, whether it is the day-to-day grind of staying strong with God when you are sometimes not sure where He is or what you should do, or whether it is the battle to come back to God when you have grievously sinned, face all of these battles with courage. See them through God's eyes, fight them with His strength, and never, never, never give up. Mighty Man of God Audiobook. Copyright 2025, Illumination Publishers, all rights reserved.